Hello, Anoushé. Welcome to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I am really looking forward to this chat because I think I'm going to learn a lot about climbing, which is something that I've tried before and failed at. And you are the perfect person to learn from. So I can't wait to hear all about it.
Oh, I think trying and failing is probably my motto, so we'll go with that.
Wow, amazing. So the first question that I ask every single guest is, how do you refer to your disability?
Ooh, interesting. I think it depends on the mood I'm in and what I'm going through and which disability is playing up, really.
Uh-huh.
I think until all my invisible illnesses took hold and started disabling me,
Yeah.
um, I really was I really did consider myself differently abled. My little arm didn't really change my ability to
Uh-huh.
do things. So, and I didn't realize that was a bad term in terms of a lot of people don't see that as a good term. It is an able washing term
Yeah.
back in the day. But as a kid, I used to just call myself differently able because I used to do things different and I didn't have other disabled people around me to talk to. I had no other role
Yeah.
models. Because I lived in Luxembourg, a really small country, very few people. That there was one person who had an arm that didn't work. They had their arm, but it just didn't work. But they were like 40 years older than me. That was
Yeah.
it. Um, and then, yeah, I have invisible illnesses. I'm chronically ill. I am disabled by my illnesses. So I am
Uh-huh.
disabled. I'm happy to say that. But I'm definitely not a person with a disability. I'm a disabled person.
Yeah, because it's so interesting the conversation around person first or disability first language. And for me, I find it, whilst it's interesting, I always just find it's almost a bit much. And I feel like a really bad person saying that because I feel like part of me shitting on part of the disabled community. But I think sometimes you just kind of got to be like, yeah, I'm disabled. It's maybe not the like most important thing about me, but this is what it is. Or a person with a disability, I'm not necessarily sure I 100% understand the difference between the two. And I think that's probably quite a difficult place to be.
I think it's a question of ownership between the two for
Yeah.
me. Because I used to call myself person with a disability until maybe 3, 4 years ago.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I definitely went through that phase, and I've changed it now. And I might change it depending on who I'm speaking to.
Uh-huh.
If I'm giving a talk to a really able-bodied crowd, it might make it easier for them to understand person with disability than disabled person.
Uh-huh.
Less of a jump for them often. But I find it's often agency and ownership for me. So
Mhm.
person with a disability is I'm a person and the disability is there, but I'm not necessarily owning it. I'm a person with a disability and I don't necessarily get on with it. I haven't owned it. It's a new space for me. I'm really struggling with it.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some denial going on. Maybe there's some shock and some trauma going on around there.
Yeah.
And I'm still processing what is happening to me.
Hmm.
Disabled person, often they're owning it and they're often rocking it as well.
Yeah.
Or there's a level of acceptance and grief that's happened and they're through that and they're on the next phase of their life. If it's something that they, that is, I don't know, God forbid, terminal, something like that, where, it's not great. But I feel disabled person is somebody who's owning it a bit more.
Yeah. And I think that's a really lovely way of just like describing the difference between the two, because I think that would be really helpful for a lot of people because, like I said, I don't always understand the difference between the two because in my head, it's like I'm just disabled and like,
It's grammar.
yeah, like it is. Interestingly, what was it like for you as a child growing up with a disability? And also, as you said, growing up in Luxembourg, which, like you said, is a really small country, and there was only maybe like one other person you knew that had some form of disability, but it wasn't the same as yours.
It was good. I mean, my parents, as I said, I was born missing my right arm below the elbow. So, and my parents obviously knew that they were going to need some sort of peer support to help them out. So they got in touch. They used to live in the UK before. So they got in touch with Reach, charity for upper limb
Yeah.
difference children. And they effectively helped my parents out in terms of saying, look, she's going to be fine. And I obviously got Pakistani heritage. I'm part Pakistani as well. And it means there are some cultural elements to disability that do happen in our culture, which are maybe like, oh, you know, it's not right to say, but oh, you're disabled, you know, maybe your parents have done something wrong, you know, what have you done
Yeah.
wrong in your life? You know, you're never going to amount to anything. So there was definitely, I think, that pressure on my parents,
Yeah.
which meant that they pushed me really hard, actually, in a good way, like in
Yeah.
a nurturing way. But effectively for them, nothing was impossible.
Mm.
Um, and it meant that I was baking really early, like using sewing needles and thread far too early as a kid. In sports, you know, I was basically just chucked into everything and
Uh-huh.
allowed to. But you know, basically, my parents allowed me to decide where I wanted to thrive in that sense. Like, but I would
Yeah.
thrive
Yeah.
in whatever I would do, wherever that was going to be, whether that was going to be school or non-school, whatever, I was going to thrive. They were going to find things that meant I could do things, and they were going to work on my weaknesses. Part of the reason they got me, my mum got me sewing and baking so early is because I was having fine motor skill problems.
Uh-huh.
So what she did was she got me quickly doing things I enjoyed.
Yeah.
Like it turned out I enjoyed them great, but she got me very quickly into working with my hands and getting around all those skills, picking things up, dropping things, working with cookies, things like that, you know,
Yeah.
putting beads on a thread, all that type of thing, making it fun, but effectively rehabbing me really, really early.
Yeah. It's so funny, isn't it? Because I really resonate with what you say about like your parents chucking you into everything. Because I had the exact same. My parents were literally like, do everything, like try everything and see what sticks and, you know, flourish in whatever area, you know, you feel like you're doing well in.
Exactly.
And like
Exactly. There
what about
was
you?
no, if I didn't like it, there was no pressure to do it at that point,
Yeah.
right? There was, I think that's what I love about it. It's, um, you know, you could see I didn't like it, but if I liked it and I wasn't good at it, they would still support me.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think there's a lot to be said in like just doing something because you like it, because we've come so used in this like hustle culture that everything that you do, you have to be good at. Where actually, I think there's so much to be learned in doing something just because it's fun, even if you're really bad at it. Like there's so much
And
more learning in that.
also, I've said this in a number of my blogs and in a campaign I did with This Girl Can. If you're going to be new at something, you're very rarely going to be good at it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if
It's
you're
so
trying
true.
something for the first time, don't expect to be good, expect to be bad and enjoy the experience.
Yeah, exactly. Like expect to be kind of rubbish at the start because everyone's a beginner at some point.
You're very rarely going to be super talented at everything you try. I think that's very rare.
Yeah.
And I've seen it happen and a few times at the climbing wall in 6 years of teaching. I've seen maybe one, two people come through who've just had a natural talent
Yeah.
and picked up extremely quickly and you know are now at elite level climbing. But that is so rare.
Mhm.
Expect to not be good at something, just enjoy the learning that comes with that. Enjoy the process, enjoy the lack of pressure. Because
Yeah.
if you're not good at it, there's no expectation for you to be good at it. So you can surprise people if you fancy it.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that. I love that take because I'm a big believer in, you know, like everyone was a beginner at some point, and actually the only thing that you get good at is something that you practice. And like you can't expect to dive in and be amazing at something straight away.
God no.
For you, how did you get into climbing and where did that journey start and how did it evolve? Because I'm so interested in this.
So the journey was a fluke journey. So I was 8, went on a school trip with with my school. We went to
Uh-huh.
France, and there was a climbing wall there, and I'd never seen one before. And I was like, "Oh, big wall thing." I'm not scared of heights, but I'm scared of landing. But at the time, it was translating to I'm scared of heights.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how to land. I've got a phobia of landing, funnily enough, not of
Uh-huh.
falling and not of heights. But it took a while
Yeah.
to understand that. So when I had to go up, we just went like traversing. But I actually freaked out at
Mm.
about a meter above the ground because I couldn't come back down because I was freaked about the idea of landing on something.
Yeah.
Um, and then we had to actually get harnessed up and top rope all the way up. And so I went up and I got up about halfway and I came down. And I remember my school teacher, who's now Facebook friends with me, I was crying because I think for her, she never imagined I'd be able to get up that far and
Yeah.
she'd never seen somebody do that. So for her, it was kind of like, oh my God, this is a bit of a miracle, cool moment. And for me, I was like, yeah, it was fine. It
It
didn't
was,
do
yeah.
anything. It was fun. It was enjoyable, I guess. But the next day we got to go back to the climbing wall, and what I'd noticed is all my friends had gotten to the top, and there were these big circles that you could tap once you'd
Uh-huh.
finished, and I didn't get to tap the circle on my first attempt. I really wanted to tap the circle on my second.
Uh-huh.
And I got up and I tapped the circle, and I really enjoyed tapping that down.
Yeah.
I really like that feeling of just achieving, but based on my own goal, on how
Yeah.
I wanted to do something. And it gave me a real sense of like, it was really pleasing to me, something that attracted me. So I came home to my parents and said, I'd like to become a climber. And they went, not on your Nelly, it is too dangerous. We don't know anybody else who climbs, and you're literally doing martial arts right now. I was just transitioning from competitive swimming to becoming, well, starting martial arts and hopefully becoming competitive in over the years to
Yeah.
come. So no. And every now and again I would ask them, can I go climbing? No. I go climbing? No. At 13, we went on a family trip, and there was a climbing wall with an instructor. So I got the okay to climb for an hour and I
Yeah.
enjoyed it. And the instructor was telling my dad that clearly enjoys it, you should go for it. And no. And at the time I was already competing in martial arts, so meh. Um, Fast forward 10 years, I had to drop martial arts when I was 16 due to my joints misaligning. We didn't know I had EDS at the time.
Yeah.
The dropping of the sports led to a loss of muscle, which meant my EDS got much, much worse, which meant I started having surgeries from the age of 18, 20,
Mhm.
on my hand. Then I had to have my thumb fused for a couple of months. So no
Yeah.
showering on my own, no bathrooming on my own, none of that. Just as I turned 18 as well, which is not ideal. And then 21 back surgery, and then 23 cancer diagnosis.
Yeah. It's
Um,
a lot.
and I finished chemo and stuff, um, and what happened was I hadn't done any sports. Like I'd done sports, I tried
Yeah.
loads since I stopped martial arts. I loved martial arts, I still do. But nothing had quite held me like martial arts did.
Yeah.
Nothing was mentally there. I wasn't in, you can go to a gym, but it didn't do anything for me. Um, and then one of my best friends, who went on the same school trip as me when we were 8, who did become a climber, who'd been trying to persuade me for years to climb, sort of went, look, why don't you come climbing with me? And I went, you kidding? Because the problem is the cancer treatment had caused damage in my left arm. So I have
Mhm.
lymphedema. I have trouble raising it above my shoulder now. It's
Yeah.
painful. It's even painful now. So things like, um, you know, brushing my hair, showering, hair drying, mixing pots in the kitchen when I'm
Yeah.
cooking, all of that is painful. So raising my arm to shoulder height or above is a problem. It's just
Uh-huh.
physically painful. And I've lost grip strength. So I sort of said to my friend, and this was like, I just finished chemo. I was struggling. I didn't have, my hair wasn't back. My eyebrows
Yeah.
weren't back. Like I was wrecked, not just physically, but spiritually wrecked. And I told my friend, you've got to be nuts, like suggesting of all the times to try climbing now.
Yeah.
And she went, look, you've tried hundreds of sports and nothing has worked. Your left arm needs to get better. You are going to lose your independence if your left arm does not get better. Climbing is going to force your hand to go above your head.
Mm-hmm.
Like you are going to get strong in those positions. And I said, but I can't do my harness up. Like I can't grip my harness anymore. And she goes, that's fine. I'll do that for you. And I was like, well, I don't know how to do my knots. And she's like, right, you've never learned how to do your knots, and now you're just being scared and you're trying to find excuses to get
Yeah.
out of it. And that's just you being scared. I'm like, but the harness is going to highlight the bits of me I don't like, because when it squeezes your tummy and your legs. So if you've got a big butt or something, it's going to highlight it, right?
Uh-huh.
And I was really body unconfident at the time, because obviously I've just been through loads of stuff and surgeries and all sorts. And she just went, look, you're just, you're making excuses up. You're just scared. um, Look, think about it this way. What's the worst that's going to happen? The worst is you try another sport, you don't like it,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't stick, right? It will be like any of the other hundreds you've tried now. The best is you find something and it changes your life.
Yeah.
Couldn't really argue with her on that point. Like, even if I wanted to argue, she, you know, it was a mic drop moment, wasn't it? Um,
Yeah.
so we went climbing, and it was awful. It was really bad. Like, I could barely get up anything. I didn't get up anything at all. Like, I got up a few moves and that was it. And it was painful. You know, my toes hurt, my hands hurt, everything hurt. You know, I was out of breath so quickly on everything because, again, I was post chemo and really
Yeah.
unfit. And I developed a heart rate issue post chemo as well, so it just wasn't ideal. And then, but the one thing that stuck or struck me was, um because my friend has all four limbs, she moves very differently to me on the climbing wall, and when I needed to replicate a move like she did on the right side, I had to adapt so much
Yeah.
that the actual thinking process of coordinating my body, balancing, timing, and it didn't have to be a strong move. It could be like something really delicate and dainty. Like, it didn't require strength as much as the stuff I was on required a lot of just movement.
Yeah.
Um, it didn't require me to be strong. It just required me to be willing to move. That all of that processing, I forgot I was ill.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot I just had cancer. I was just a climber. For
Yeah.
a precious few seconds in that session, I was just me.
Yeah.
And it was that feeling that made me go back to the gym and start training cardio. A couple of years later, I moved to London for work. Didn't know anybody in London, didn't have any climber friends. So I just go back to Luxembourg every couple of months to see my parents, and at the same time catch a climbing session with my friend. It was never going to be more than a hobby.
Yeah.
Oh, do it, you know, have a climb, go have a Sunday lunch sort of situation. Never more than that. And then a couple of years living in London, I realized I was really missing it. I went off and did a taster course at a climbing wall. And then I moved in with an old flatmate um, who wanted to climb and had heard about this awesome center in North London. And I was like, hey, I've just done my taster course. And she's like, well, I don't know how to do my knots. I'm like, okay, I can teach you. And so we went together and decided that that was going to be the thing we were going to do socially. And it was something that we were going to be bad at together. It was never an intention to put it into something, well, what it is now, effectively. It was just going to be a social thing.
Yeah.
And within a few weeks of this, Reach contacted me and said, look, there's a climbing competition at your wall in 3 weeks. I went,
Mhm.
well, I'm not going. I'm not going. I can't. I used to compete in martial arts. I used to compete in swimming. And yes, I hadn't competed in 10 years. I hadn't trained in anything in 10 years. But I couldn't do that to myself. I couldn't, for me, because I've had a background in that, it wasn't all levels, all abilities climbing competition. You could actually turn up as a beginner and you would find something to climb on. Absolutely. But for
Mhm.
me, I felt like I needed to train. So I got a coach a couple of months later. And we went in 2016 and started training and competing. And yeah, I ended up ranking second in the UK that year, in my category, right? So, like,
Yeah.
obviously not out of all the para climbers, but in my category. And yeah, basically snowballed a bit. That was it. It became infectious. Climbing wasn't just a hobby; it became a lifestyle.
Mhm.
Um, Most of my life revolves around that still. So, you know, I'm sitting next to my climbing wall in my office.
Yeah.
Um, you know, if that doesn't say something, you know, I met my husband in a competition. He proposed at a competition, so
Yeah.
he climbs. So like it became a thing. You know, I started blogging about being new to
Yeah.
climbing and, you know, worried about body image, and that snowballed into regular blogs and podcasts, and it just completely changed my life.
Yeah. And I think what's so important about what you said, and something that really, again, like I really resonate with what you just said about adapting, because what you said, like, you know, how you're talking about how it wouldn't have to necessarily be like a massive movement. It could be something very delicate, and you would just have to almost fine tune it and change it. And that's the exact same for me, because obviously, oh God, everybody knows if you listen to this podcast, I do CrossFit, like I love CrossFit. And it's the exact same. Things might not be like a big movement, but I have to find my ways of adapting to it. And it could be ever so subtle. But using your brain in that way, you're right, it completely takes you out of, you know, the things that you're thinking about, and you're focusing on yourself and how you can do this movement to the best of your ability, and it's about nobody else around you but you and yourself and how you move. And that's so important and so key.
I always tell people when they ask me if I meditate, or I say I can't sit still. I can't. I'm just not that sort of person. I really struggle sitting in silence and sitting still.
Yeah.
But when I'm on the climbing wall, it's effectively active meditation, because when you're in that zone, there is nothing else that exists. And you are so present in the moment that it is forcing you to escape your world for a bit. And I think it's so mentally healthy to do that.
Yeah, I completely 110% agree.
And yeah, in any sport will do that. Any arts and crafts will do that if you find that thing that works for you. It can be baking, it can be any activity. If you find an activity that can do that for you, regardless of what that is, right? Coloring, the world is your oyster in terms of the number of activities that are available for everybody to try. But if you can find that zone, not only are you going to be mindful and present in the moment and develop a practice, you're actually going to give yourself a breather from your regular life and the stress that comes with your regular life.
Yeah, for sure. Interestingly, you said that you have EDS, and I know a lot of people who also have EDS. And I was wondering, for you, what was the diagnosis process like? Because I know a lot of people who have really struggled with their diagnosis of EDS, and what I'm learning more about it is actually the process for a diagnosis is nothing short of horrendous.
Yeah, I think disaster is probably where I'd go with that. I mean, if you look at my life history, I think we probably should have diagnosed me when I was like 2. Based on just I had all the typical gastro symptoms already from age 0. I was having gastro symptoms. Shoulder was already popping out, so I had to stop martial arts. Popping out. Put it this way, I was losing count of how many times it was popping out by the time I got it checked.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was a fun trick, which I showed to my parents, and my parents totally disagreed with me. But yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I thought it was not painful. It was, I popped it out for fun. That's kind of where my shoulder was at.
Shoulder that
yeah, I used to pop it out for fun.
I can also pop out my right shoulder, which also happens to be the arm that like doesn't exist. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, so it's really common in limb different folk to be able to do funky things with their little arms. Like, it's just a thing. But the fact that I could dislocate it that quickly with no pain was a little bit worrying for people, because there were also other signs and symptoms that I might have been hypermobile in other joints.
Yeah.
Other things were also popping out, but maybe that's more painfully. So Luxembourg, honestly, too small a country at the time. They're now becoming more EDS aware. There's an actual EDS Luxembourg, so that's kind of really cool. They formed last year, so that's kind of really nice to see that happening now. But back in the day, definitely wasn't something that was recognized. It was only when I moved to London and actually got referred in, because I've been under prosthetic services all my life. So I got referred into my prosthetic services, and they happen to also have specialist EDS people there. Doctors and stuff, and so my prosthetic services were the ones who referred me into physio.
Wow.
Because they could see just how so often with EDS you'll find if you haven't degraded as a child, then you'll degrade around significant hormonal or life changes. So for me, my first big degradation will have been puberty, and my second big degradation was the move to London post chemo, because I moved to London a year after chemo. So effectively, it was a lot of very big physical changes for me, both the chemo and the treatments and the recovery and doing my master's, but also the actual move to London and learning to live on my own again. All of that had actually caused a degradation in my symptoms. And effectively, by the time I got into referral into the prosthetics, they were the ones who noticed that I was hypermobile and referred me to physio, and they were the ones who said I need to get referred into a specialist. Took 2.5 years for the waiting time, and we were literally biding our time in physio, because it was very clear it was I was physically active, but I was getting so many injuries. At the time I wasn't climbing, And yeah, got to my doctor, and I literally walked into the room, and she just went, "Yeah, you have EDS." I didn't even have to wait. Like, she just went, "You walk like a person who has EDS."
Yeah.
It was quite funny. And in fact, I was with her in Rome last weekend, to give a talk at an EDS conference about pain.
Wow.
Now we're out. People know who my doctor is. What I mean to say is, like, I mean, we have a great relationship, and it's amazing, and she's so supportive. But and happy to refer me on to other specialists, because for me, it's not just EDS that's my problem. I've got
Uh-huh.
loads of autoimmune problems going on. I have other malformations in my body, which are now coming to light, that we didn't know I had. So my arm is definitely not my only malformation.
Yeah.
So like, the good thing is, I'm now in the system, but not only that, I've got an amazing doctor who's happy to listen to me. And also my doctors are very aware. I think a lot of problems that happen with people with EDS is they get gaslit because it's a
Yeah.
non-tangible condition. It's very hard to see on scans if there's a problem. Most people with EDS won't necessarily have, like, malformations in their joints or things like that, which would be contributing to problems.
Yeah.
They'll just have, it's depending on the type, obviously the type of EDS you have. So obviously there's like 14 types. The most common of which is the hypermobile type, and that's the one where people are having the most problem with diagnosis,
Mhm.
because that's the one that's least tangible. And you've got everything from, oh, you're a bit bendy, to, oh, you have hypermobile spectrum disorder, to, oh, you have EDS,
Yeah.
depending on how impacted you are, and where things are going. So that's where the problem is. There's no clear, they're still working out the diagnostic criteria. They've changed them again recently,
Mhm.
which has messed some people up completely in terms of where they are in the diagnosis routes. With the other types of EDS, they're impacted very differently. They're much more serious EDSs,
Mhm.
vascular and things like that. That the prognoses are very different as well for them. So, so far from what I've heard as an EDS UK ambassador, is the diagnosis routes for them are better, but they also need to be, because those ones are frankly more dangerous and more
Yeah.
life limiting.
Yeah. And like I find the conversation around EDS so interesting, because you said, it's so common, but it's not, because there's 14 different types. So it's an umbrella term, like a bit like disabilities, this massive umbrella term that everybody thinks that we all fit under, and actually
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
so individual to the individual person, and the EDS is kind of the exact same. And it's always interesting to have those conversations.
Yeah, and that's why I make it a point to actually talk about the other EDSs as much as I
Mhm.
talk about hypermobile now, because actually I gave an interview last year, and I always talk about every EDS, but I had mentioned the other EDSs, but I
Mhm.
got pulled up on it by a lot of EDSers. Kind of came onto my profile and sort of went, "You didn't do enough," and I went, "Okay, guys, like, I tried. Like, I'm not a perfect
Yeah.
person. I had 5 minutes to shoot out something on the BBC or ITV or whatever program I was on.
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of time. It's very hard to get a soundbite in there. All I was trying to do was raise awareness first.
Yeah.
And then if I have the time, I get out and do more. But yeah, now I'm like, no, there are 14 types. That's and the hypermobile type, where I can say the hypermobile type is the most common. That doesn't mean that the symptoms are less valid or less dangerous or less, they can absolutely lead to dangerous symptoms and stuff like that as well, and dangerous complications. But again, we've got different prognosis going on.
Yeah.
From what I understand, I am not a doctor here.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So I personally believe that through any form of like hardship, if you can look back and notice a positive in yourself, then I don't want to say it's been worth it, because I think that's very like making something trivial out of something that could be very difficult. But if you can look back and notice a really positive attribute in yourself, then something good has come from it. And I was wondering, have you noticed a positive attribute within yourself through any times of hardship?
So I'm totally a silver lining girl,
Uh-huh.
which means, yeah, inevitably, it doesn't really matter what the hardship is. Um, there will be something positive that comes out of it, even if I've got to go through hell and back to get through it. There will inevitably be something good that comes out of it. I have faith in that. Um, so yeah, whether that's positive for me, is in like something about me, maybe something about my resilience, something about my ability to cope, something about my ability to self-care. Um, Maybe it's something I've learned that I can share with others.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just, coincidence. I wasn't planning on moving to London. It just so happened that personal life changes meant that I moved to London was going to happen. It just so happened my personal life changed so much that the reason to move to London didn't exist anymore. I still made the move to London despite all of that. And actually, it's changed my life completely. Um, that's a huge silver lining. I mean, I would never have become a climber. I certainly wouldn't be who I am today. I would never have met my husband. There are so many good things that have happened out of what ended up being a very difficult circumstance.
Yeah.
Right? How cool is that?
Yeah. I love that so much. Is that I think I'm going to say that, like, I'm a silver lining kind of gal. I love that so much.
Yeah, but I am, because like it took years for me to be grateful for that experience.
Yeah.
Years. And I'm still upset and angry about that experience to some extent. But also I'm extremely grateful because I would never have moved to London.
Yeah.
I would never have found a job I love. I would never have been trying to juggle effectively now 3 jobs. Because I've got, my day job, public work, and climbing training. So now 3 jobs. So it's a bit of a juggle. But none of this would have happened.
Yeah.
I still would have probably been a bit lost, frankly, if I hadn't made the move.
Yeah. I think like you said, a silver lining kind of gal. I love that. So
And it doesn't have to be a big silver lining.
yeah, that's the thing. It doesn't have to be
It doesn't have to be a big, it can be something like, I'm really grateful I have a really comfortable bed I can sleep on.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? Or I'm really grateful that I'm able to get up today and make myself a cup of tea. Like, on a really shit day, sorry, can I say that word?
Yeah, coach can. Crack on.
Sorry, never know. On a really, really shit day, it can be something so small that somebody can be grateful for, right? But that can just turn the mood of that day just a little bit and make that day just that little less crap.
Yeah, for sure. So I like to ask, it's kind of a 2-part question. I really need to figure out how to reword it so it makes a lot more sense, but you'll get the gist. So, do you have a piece of advice for a younger version of yourself and a younger person with the same disability as you?
You are more than you think you are.
Oh, I love that.
And keep believing in your impossible.
Oh, I love those. That I think it's always so important to, particularly when we think about younger people with disability, I feel like, and maybe you feel the same, I'm not 100% sure, but looking back when I was younger, if someone had told me like all these pieces of advice, I think I probably would have listened at some point and like been like, yeah, like things are possible. And not that I ever believed that they weren't possible, but I always knew that I was creating something for myself that I didn't see. And now we have more representation because of social media and Instagram and just better representation in general, even though that's a bit questionable. But these pieces of advice, I love collecting them for someone else.
So I do a lot of work. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking to the Duke of Edinburgh Youth Ambassadors. So a lot of work with the next generation now. I'm working with my generation, but I'm also working with the younger generation. I've always been a mentor, like since I was since I could start mentoring effectively, I was already mentoring. So it's something that has always been something I want to do. But you're right, like there is more representation. Again, let's caveat it with all the beautiful caveats that come with that word, right? Because it's a loaded term and it's a loaded problem, let's call it. And again, I'm probably not using the right word there, but okay, let's just call it loaded and park it there. But the reality is, social media's helped. Like, I didn't know any other Muslim climbers when I started climbing. I didn't know any other hijabi climbers when I started climbing. I was the first one that I knew of in my climbing center and that I knew of in London or possibly in the UK. I have no idea. There's so many more now, and it's amazing. I didn't know any other paraclimbers when I first started climbing in the UK. I met my first paraclimbers when I went to my first climbing competition, and then there was like 20 of them. And I was like, oh my God, my brain's going to explode, right? I
Yeah.
was overwhelmed, not just by the fact that the center was massive, because I nearly fainted at the sight of it, but also, no, because the thing is, it's in a ravine. So
So
they
yeah,
built
it's
a
huge.
glass thing on a ravine.
Yeah.
And when you go in on the 5th floor. So you have to look down to see where you're going to start
No,
climbing from.
thank you. I'm just gonna tap out now.
And I went in and I remember going to reception. I went to sign in and sort of say I'm here and find out where the other paraclimbers were and all the rest. And they were running an able-bodied youth competition with like 150 kids as well on the same day. So there were loads of hovering helicopter parents, all of that going on.
Yeah.
And I'm just, I didn't have my parents with me or anything. I had family friends with me, thankfully. And I remember going to reception, go, we're here, but where's the actual climbing? And they're like, just look out the window. And I looked, my friend went, you've got really white in the face. I'm like, yeah, there's a reason for it. So, it, definitely in the last 6 years, I think more people have gotten more confident to use their voices, regardless of how they might be perceived or judged. And that, I think, is the biggest shift change we're seeing at the moment in our society. That the people who don't get heard are making themselves heard. And it takes a lot of energy for the people who are in that space to be doing that. Because you've got to deal with your own imposter syndrome. You've got to deal with the fact that you might think things are impossible, but you're going against your own internal self-doubt to deal with that. You're taking on potentially the responsibility of being a role model. In fact, you probably are taking on that responsibility, and whether you realize it or not, that is a heavy responsibility. Whether you're aware or not that you are a role model. When I became aware of that, like after I won my first award in 2017, and I got told I was a role model, I was like, oh, I would have let that sink in for a couple of days, because I didn't realize that, and that was actually quite heavy for me. That's quite heavy to understand that, and understand the ramifications of my actions do have an impact on others potentially. That's a heavy thing to think about. That's not a small thing, you know what I mean? Like, dude. And especially when you're out in social media, you are held to account I feel in a bigger way. Then, because you are held to account in some cases by people who are very insecure behind a keyboard.
Keyboard warriors. They love a good comment.
I know. I'm trying not to use that term, so I'm trying to be kind and call them insecure people behind keyboards.
I quite like that. It's a lot nicer than a keyboard warrior.
It also implies, I firmly believe if somebody is being a keyboard warrior, then often it's because there's something going on in themselves that's troubling themselves, right? Hence why I'm trying to change my own wording around people who are insecure behind keyboards, because actually, or people going through a lot behind their keyboards, because why would anybody go out on social media to be mean if something wasn't troubled in themselves? In some way. It could be a really frustrating day at work. It could be a really frustrating day out of work. It could be anything going on, but it's meant they've had to go out and lash out because they have no other space, no support system. They're not being heard. They're isolated. They've had a really shit day in a hospital appointment. I don't know. But what else would cause somebody to go out and be mean? Unless they're genuinely mean, fair play. But otherwise, because you get them too, right? But what else would cause somebody else to troll? Right? There's got to be something fundamentally going wrong in somebody's life to do that, right?
I completely agree. I do completely agree. So for me, I recently had someone ask if they could, whilst out at dinner, they asked if they could cut up my food for me, right? And there's also like other certain like questions.
Sorry.
It's a lot, right?
I haven't had that happen to me in a long while.
So this is where I'm going with this. Is there a particular set of like questions or comments that you have to laugh at, or you kind of like you shrug off, or you just think like, oh, I don't need to have this conversation again? Do you have a particular set of those questions that are like often quite weird and wonderful?
Well, the problem is I have the experience of now 3 disability worlds. I was
Uh-huh.
born missing my right arm, so visibly disabled to start with.
Yeah.
Living with invisible illnesses where my health degraded, where I needed adjustments, where I needed adjustments for things people couldn't see.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm now an ambulant wheelchair user as of the last 2 years. So a
Yeah.
hell of a learning curve around that.
Yeah.
Because I am too young to be in a wheelchair, according to a lot of people on the street. Um, Right. So I've become, according to some people I know, the angry disabled person since the wheelchair. Not because I'm angry about using my chair. No, God, I love my chair. But about angry about the reaction that I'm experiencing in the street, just the
Yeah.
chronic stress of having to go out. Because it's honestly, some people are really shit.
Yeah.
So it's not pleasant. Awkward things. Well, I've become a bit braver since becoming a wheelchair user in terms of challenging said awkward things. So I was on my way to the shop I don't know, it was the height of the summer, just after the first heat wave. And I was on my way, and we have this lovely little suitcase system on the back of my wheelchair. So we add a suitcase on the back of my chair, and then we can go to shops, pack the stuff in the suitcase, and come home. So it's great,
Yeah.
absolutely fantastic. And we were on our way, and my suitcase had dropped off my chair. My husband was with me because we were, you know, I was about to go on a big trip, and my husband was. We were testing out all sorts of stuff to make
Uh-huh.
sure it all worked before I did it. Situation, and so he was fixing the suitcase back onto the chair, and this guy is standing outside a pub. He's got a shirt on, but it's like an open front shirt, so like
Yeah.
rocking the abs and whatever else going on, or attempted abs, I guess. Um, and he comes up to me and he sort of goes, "Can I ask you a personal question?" Oh, I don't you hate it when that happens. Like, because inevitably whatever is going to come out next is not going to be good.
Yeah.
Um, and I was honestly really frustrated with the suitcase and the fact that not 100 meters before somebody had parked their damn car on a dropped curb. So it took me ages to get off that drop curb. So I was angry anyway.
Yeah.
So I decided to go and entertain the question and just see what would happen because I was just in a mood and I was like, do you know
Yeah.
what? Let me be a keyboard warrior in real life. So I decided to just go, you can ask me the personal question. I don't guarantee you that I'm going to respond.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't guarantee that I'm going to respond in a very friendly way, but you can ask the question. I'm
Yeah.
just caveating that you might not get a very pleasant response. And he asked me, stuff about my arm, and like he asked me, how, was I born with my arm, or whatever else, and something else, and I, or how, some really weird, like, how does it feel to be born with my arm, or some really awkward question like that. It wasn't just normal awkward; it was like awkward,
Yeah.
awkward. So I went on and went, well, you know what? Has anybody ever asked you why your belly button is shaped so weirdly? Or your nose is so long, or why you have weird eyebrow hair. I mean, how would you feel if people came up into the street and asked you about why you have a nose hair that you haven't plucked out? Like, why? And how would you feel about that? And he goes, I'd feel really awkward. I said, yeah, so why are you asking me that same damn question?
Yeah.
And he goes, oh, I didn't mean to be rude. I said, but no, but you are being rude.
Yeah.
And that is rude. So next time you go ask somebody a really personal question, ask yourself how you would feel being asked that question and see whether you're going to ask it. So yeah, lesson learned, moral story taught. Oh my God, so pissed off.
But actually, that's a really like perfect example of using your voice. All right, like you said, like you were a bit angry and whatever, like shit had not necessarily gone your way, a couple of minutes before. But actually, it's such an interesting way to be like, actually, the questions you're asking me are completely like they're dehumanizing because you wouldn't ask anybody else any of
They're
these other
inappropriate.
questions. Like you don't need to know the
You
answers to them.
wouldn't ask somebody in the street. No,
Yeah.
no, exactly. You don't need to, nobody needs to know about, yeah, sure, I'm a public figure. I have plenty of stuff in blogs and in podcasts, on and interviews that people
Yeah.
can find out about if they really wanted to. Like, I'm not shy about sharing certain things about my life,
Yeah.
right? Absolutely not. But there are certain things that are completely off limits, my fertility included, as an
Yeah.
example. So that's a question that comes up a lot. You know, you're married, you've been married 2 years, when are you going to have children? I think that's just such an inappropriate question to
Yeah.
anybody. It's
Yeah.
just such an inappropriate question. And, you know, for anybody who might be going through any sort of difficulties around that, it's a traumatizing question.
Yeah, of
It's
course.
a question that shouldn't be asked, especially if you're thinking careers, anything like that, not okay. There's just, we do it way too much in our society, and it's not just at disabled people.
Yeah.
I just think disabled people get it worse because we are dehumanized.
Yeah. And
In my
that's
chair, people talk to my husband, not me.
yeah.
Right? You know, I might pay for something in a shop, they still give him the bloody receipt.
Yeah.
I mean, what the hell is that, right?
Yeah. And the thing
What
is,
is that?
it's not the first time I've heard this either. And it won't be the last time either, because I know plenty of people who have this experience. And it's
The
it's the
please.
dehumanization,
Oh yeah.
it's the level of, you know, thinking that disability, and sometimes, you know, people seem to equate disability and learning disability and, you know, complex neurodivergent issues all in one. And that's why this whole umbrella term of disability, like, it's great, but it's also absolutely horrendous, because we're not all the same, and it doesn't all equal the same thing for every single person.
I mean, I had a kid once. This was when I was a kid. And once told me, you know, the reason your brain doesn't work is because you're missing half an arm. Right. This is, I mean, this person ended up was in. So this person isn't like somebody I know. So I'm not going to go further into what ended up happening as a consequence of that, in
Yeah.
terms of like, because they were told off quite significantly by some certain adults. So what I'm saying is there was an action that took place as a consequence, because
Yeah.
effectively they got told on by friends. But what I'm saying is, yeah, you know, equating a visible physical disability with any sort of other disability, and it's wrong on, but that's because disability itself is such an umbrella
Yeah,
term.
it is.
And we're so often badly portrayed in the media, not portrayed in the right way. Inevitably, now with social media, we're learning to use our voices, but often, like, how often am I on Twitter complaining about airports? It's, you know, they broke my chair 2 weeks ago. So how often am I complaining about, you know, on Twitter, complaining about things rather
Yeah.
than, I'm celebrating things too, but I'm often complaining about things on Twitter. I mean, I'm a great place to get customer service. It genuinely is. But it's just that sort of thing. I remember pre-wheelchair times, pre-Punta, every now and again I'd use the Transport for London, please give me a seat badge. Because
Yeah.
every now and again my symptoms were so bad I needed to sit down, and frankly, you know, it was just easier doing it that way. And I you know, I'd put on the badge, and because I didn't want to have to ask for a seat, you know what I mean? You
Yeah.
just get tired being doing all your emotional labor for yourself, right? And you know, if you're needing the badge, you're probably feeling so shit anyway. Do you really want to go ahead and do your own emotional labor, right?
Yeah.
So I get onto the tube, and I asked for a seat. I did this. I did this as an experiment for a few weeks. So I
Mhm.
tested it. If I was in a t-shirt where my arm was visible, I'd get a seat immediately, because the person would look down to my feet, look up, stop at my arm, and offer me a seat. Because apparently, missing an arm means my legs don't work, right? Because
Yeah.
that's the only reason they'd give me a seat, right?
Yeah.
Not sure where the logic is there. But if I was in a big, bulky jacket, they'd ask me why I needed a seat.
Yeah.
And I did this. I did this for about 6 weeks on the trot. And I just experimented with it. I tried different tops, I tried different jackets, I tried different t-shirts, I tried
Yeah.
carrying a bag, I tried not carrying. I just literally varied the circumstances and just decided to see what people's perceptions were.
Yeah.
And it was really fascinating. So that, hence why I'm proactively, when I do encounter really difficult situations, I try and teach in them. So the dude outside the pub who decided
Yeah.
to ask the inappropriate question, the reason I've taken to doing it that way and in a more teaching and sometimes condescending way as consequence, but teaching ways, because actually people don't understand. People don't self-educate themselves about disability. So
Yeah.
if we aren't doing it, the world is not going to change. And unfortunately, that means we have to take on that emotional labor. But the reality is life's not going to change without that. At least I don't think so.
Yeah. With all of this being said, I have one final question for you. And that
Woo!
is, can you say that you're disabled and proud?
Oh, totally. Totally. For me, my disabilities are firmly threads in my tapestry of life.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be me without them.
Mhm.
I wouldn't have learned to adapt without them. I wouldn't have learned to be resilient without them. I wouldn't have found my husband without them. I
Yeah.
wouldn't be doing 3 jobs I absolutely love without them,
Mhm.
right? They have given me so much more. Yeah, society can be shit. Yes, we have what's the word?
Systemic.
Systemic, that's the one. Systemic issues in society that need dealing with. Yes, often I feel disabled by barriers in society,
Mhm.
social model of disability than the medical model. Saying that, I've met some of the best people in the world. I've
Yeah.
spoken to some awesome people. I've helped change some people's lives because of my own disabilities.
Yeah.
I've had opportunities to teach and train people who are now on the GB paraclimbing team.
Yeah.
I've had opportunities to get little children who are really shy to use their voice. Like, I've helped people get diagnoses for conditions because they've been worried about how to word things with doctors,
Yeah.
like learning how to advocate for themselves. Um, it's amazing. Like, I get to be the change I see in the world.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be able to do that without disability empowering me. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's hard sometimes. Don't get me wrong. I'll have a good old rant on some days,
Yeah.
but it's also bloody amazing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on today. I have really enjoyed this conversation and I've learned a lot from it as well. And thank you for giving up your time and just like having this chat with me. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.